Here's a React problem you've probably encountered before. You conditionally render a component, and when the component's show logic becomes false, the component just disappears instantly, no animations. React removes it from the DOM instantly, and there's no chance to animate it out. Well, Motion's AnimatePresence component fixes that. Okay, we have a pretty empty looking UI here. We just have a show button, and as the name indicates, when we click show, it's going to reveal that box. And you've noticed a nice little fade in. Now, when I click on hide, bang, it's instantly out of the DOM. No animation whatsoever. So we have an initial state with opacity of 0, and we animate it into opacity of 1. And you've noticed this when the element enters. And as you can see below, Motion also gives us an exit property, which is something to animate when the component is removed from the tree. But even with exit set to opacity 0, the hide is still going to be abrupt. Let's make the demo a little bit more obvious. Scale 0.5, and yeah, we'll complete like this. We animate into full scale and exit back to 0.5. So now we'll have a little bit more visual feedback of the enter animation, and now you should see that it's clearly abrupt. The exit animation by itself is not enough. We need to wrap our component that conditionally shows in an AnimatePresence component. Check this out. Here I will go AnimatePresence. This should have imported the AnimatePresence component that we can use to wrap our motion.div that we want to conditionally show. And you can see here the import. With that change alone, Motion is going to make sure that this motion.div remains in the DOM while exiting, and it's going to remove it from the DOM after the exit animation has occurred. So let's animate in, and now let's try animate out. Aha, now we're talking. Also, random side note, but speaking of AnimatePresence, I think a present has animated itself onto my couch. Okay, but back to seriousness. I want you to know that the AnimatePresence needs to be wrapped around, outside of the conditional logic. Because if we had the AnimatePresence inside the show conditional, well, that component is only going to mount and dismount when the condition change, and so we will be back to something that doesn't work. So be sure that you always wrap your AnimatePresence outside of the condition. All right, here we're just exiting out a single element and there's no layout shift, so it's not a big deal. But let's take a look at what happens when we have multiple items and we remove one. What happens to the other elements? Okay, so here we have another example with multiple elements. And you can see they are wrapped in an AnimatePresence and they have an exit animation that scales down to 0.8 and fades out. And now it's not going to work very nicely from the start, but if I try to click on the first item, whoa, did you see what happened? We clicked on the first item, but the last one disappeared. Let me show you one more time. That's not good. Okay, so what happens here is we are in an array.map iteration. And so, like always in React, React needs to have a key to make sense of what element is what. So here I can pass the item that is going to be unique because the items have a unique number here, but make sure that each key is unique. If I refresh the page to go back to 4 items, now if I click on the second element, that's the one that should disappear. And you can see that it works nicely, it fades out, and the other elements wait for it to happen before taking the new position. Now, just to show you, if we had a non-unique key here, we are going to have the same problem again of the last element disappearing. So make sure your keys are always unique. In this particular example, the default behavior of AnimatePresence works quite well. The element is going to disappear and animate the disappearance before the other elements take their new place. You actually have a few options in that regard by using the mode property on the AnimatePresence component. So we got sync, wait, and popLayout. So sync is actually the default behavior, and it works in this specific example, but sync will animate in and out at the same time. And so if you have elements leaving and other entering, you might have an issue, which I'm going to show you in a second. Wait would wait for the elements to leave before bringing the new ones. And here an example that might work quite well is popLayout. So let me click on one of the elements and then explain to you what happens. I'll remove the second one here. And arguably this happens too fast to understand, but basically popLayout is going to pop the element you remove out of the layout flow, which means the other elements will take the space they need as if that element doesn't exist anymore, but in the foreground, floating on top, the animation for the exit is going to happen. Let me change the transition here to have a duration of 2 seconds. And once again, I'm going to remove the middle element so you can see that the other two elements have started coming along against each other while the element was exiting. So basically, it still operates the exit animation, but the layout flow underneath is already resetting. It's not waiting for the animation to finish. All right, so I'll remove the transition duration and let me comment out this popLayout and I'll show you the behavior back to back. This is without it, so the elements will wait for the exit animation before coming through. And now if I turn popLayout on, this is the new behavior where the elements aren't waiting anymore. Okay, so let's now look at an example where mode sync, the default, doesn't work. In this example, we have a square representing the home page, and when I click on next, it's going to cycle through the different pages. Think of them as pages throughout our navigation. We have an array of 3 pages here, and then we have an index piece of state. And every time we click on next, it's going to increment the state, and we are displaying the content of pages index. Pretty simple. Now notice that there is not a loop or an array.map here. We have a single element. Now this is really cool, but you can trigger enter and leave animations from this single element by changing its key. So let's grab these pages.index, and we're going to set a key attribute on our element of exactly that, pages.index. And did you see instantly there was a little enter leave animation? So now when I cycle through the pages, we have an exit and enter animation, which is very cool, but also exposes a new problem. And that's the behavior of the mode sync that I was talking to you about. The leave and enter animations happen at the same time, and therefore we have this little period of awkwardness when both are competing for space. That is a classic use case to use a different mode, which is wait. The wait mode is going to wait for the elements to leave before bringing the new elements in. In our example, this is perfect because it's going to make sure the previous page goes away before the new one comes in, and we don't have these layout jumps when 2 pages are competing for attention. Very cool. All right, I could show you a lot more, but this lesson is getting a bit long. I want you to remember the following things. You need to have a unique key in your AnimatePresence elements so that React knows what to do with them. The AnimatePresence wrapper needs to be outside of the condition, not inside. And like you've seen, if you want to change dynamically or exit and enter an element, the same element, you can change its key and React is going to treat it like a different element and exit it and bring the new one in.